some of our commercial real estate, instead of holding that note, what they could do is if they maybe had a lot of people come in and they didn't necessarily want all of that risk, they could sell the note to an investor, and the investor is essentially going to get the income stream of that investment. But the downside, I'm sorry that I'm already jumping to the downside, but I'm just trying to figure this out. The downside is if the person doesn't pay the loan. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you are being a micro bank within.
You are a bank.
Okay, cool.
When you buy real estate notes, you are the bank.
Cool.
You own the mortgage for that person. You have the rights to foreclose on them and all.
Really?
And also, though, this is one of the benefits, restructure that.
This is BetterWealth with Caleb Guilliams. All right, we're going to be talking about real estate investment notes, buying other people's mortgages, all those good things. I'm here with Matt Fore, the producer of Ice Cream with Investors, and you talk all about real estate investing, and it's great. I love the series that we're in on the BetterWealth show. And so with that, this is something I'm not super familiar with, but I have heard of people doing this, and I'm got my notebook out ready to learn.
Real estate notes is really you being the bank. So we were talking about it offline that when you go to Bank of America and sign up for a mortgage, Bank of America most times doesn't keep that on their books. What they do is sell it to a note investor. There are some big institutions out there, and then they get their cash back to go invest in other things. On a small community bank standpoint, sometimes they need to free up cash and will sell off their notes to small mom and pop investors like myself. I can buy the mortgage that a person has. So that's what really investing in notes is really buying mortgages for consistent income streams.
So in other words, I got my start in working at a community bank, and they would sell all the 30-year fixed mortgages to Freddie or Fannie. Okay, they did that. Some of our commercial real estate, instead of holding that note, what they could do is if they maybe had a lot of people come in and they didn't necessarily want all of that risk, they could sell the note to an investor, and the investor is essentially going to get the income stream of that investment. But the downside, I'm sorry that I'm already jumping to the downside, but I'm just trying to figure this out. The downside is if the person doesn't pay the loan. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you are being a micro bank within.
You are a bank.
Okay, cool.
When you buy real estate notes, you are the bank.
Cool.
You own the mortgage for that person. You have the rights to foreclose on them and all.
Really?
And also, though, this is one of the benefits, restructure that. I'll give you a couple of pros. So the pros about this space is there's no maintenance. The bank is not knocking on my door saying, hey, we have a mortgage with you. We want to come inspect your property. And I don't call the bank when I say, hey, I've got a running toilet. Will you come fix it? So it's a way to get involved in real estate without having to have to deal with tenants, maintenance, capital expenditures, and all of that. Second benefit that I've seen in this space is the lower cost of entry. So I can absolutely go buy a note from a bank, or I can buy a portion of the payments. You really see this in the real estate investing community when people are doing seller finance. So I sell Caleb my house on a seller finance note. So Caleb is paying me the income streams. I can then turn around and sell it to Dan the first 12 payments. So you can get involved in buying a partial, is what they call them, of the real estate notes. And then the last thing that I absolutely love about this space is small community banks will offload assets that are underperforming, offload real estate mortgages that are underperforming instead of foreclosing on people. Why? Because there's only 2 banks in town and they don't want to be known as the bank that's going around foreclosing on people. So if a bank, and you can pull this up on FDIC.com and see which banks have loans in real estate that are older than 90 days, older than 120, and you can call that bank and say, hey, I'll offer you 60 cents on the dollar for that mortgage. And some banks would say, yes, please get it off my books because I don't want to have to go through the foreclosure process and have that reputation that I'm the one out there foreclosing on it. So when you buy that note at like 60 cents on the dollar, you now can go to that borrower and say, tell me what's going on here. well, we had a flat tire and we didn't pay in month 1. And then all of a sudden, month 2, we were behind and we didn't feel like we could catch up. So we just stopped paying. Okay, how about you just give me half of what you owe or a third of what you owe? We restructure the terms. Instead of a 20-year left on your mortgage, we'll go 30. You can really start playing around with the numbers here to make it all work. I'm going to give everybody a book recommendation on this. It's called Invest in Debt by Jim Napier. And he wrote a brilliant book on all of the different ways you can restructure loans to make them financially work for. If you say, for instance, I only want a 12% return on my money, he gives you some formulas to say, this is what you would need to do in that situation. He basically gives you an A plus B equals C. As long as you know one of the A plus B equals C, as long as you know one of those, you can kind of restructure this. So I personally, as a finance geek and somebody that just likes to move around numbers and play with them in my head, love the note space because you can just be super creative.
Yeah, and the other pro to this is I feel like there's not a lot of people. It's not very competitive, and so if you actually understand this, if you become specialized, have specialized knowledge in this, you almost might be pinching yourself, saying like, why aren't other people doing this? Well, other people don't know that this exists, and so it's one of those things that it can be a pro if you're the right person.
Yeah, a good friend of mine, Jamie Bateman, owns the Good Deeds podcast, or he's co-host on the Good Deeds podcast, and Good Deeds is about real estate notes. And he just does a really good job of kind of educating me and understanding how creative they can get. He's got this brilliant story out there where he bought a note in Jacksonville, Florida for like 40 cents on the dollar. The person wasn't performing on it. They restructured the loan. They defaulted again. So he foreclosed on the home and he bought that property for 50 cents on the dollar of what it was worth. And it needed no repairs and basically flipped it. So he made a 50% return on his money by holding the property and working with the borrower and ultimately having to go through a foreclosure, which is not something I love to do. But, people sign up for obligations, and if they don't fulfill those obligations, there's consequences on it.
Is one of the cons to this is like when you say foreclosing, like I see where a bank can foreclose, but like how does Matt Fore foreclose on me? Like how does that work?
Yeah. Well, remember, Matt Fore in this situation is the bank. They own the obligation. That person who has the mortgage owes Matt Fore the money. I bought the contract for that money. And if you don't pay Matt Fore the bank, for instance, then it's the same foreclosure process as a bank would go through, as a county would go through, as anybody who's delinquent on their debt would go through. So that actually is one of the cons here, is the barrier to entry to understanding the legal ramifications. There's a number of different deed types. There's land deeds, deed of trust, deed in lieu, quitclaim deeds, all that kind of stuff. So understanding this deed in this county has this legal ramification is a barrier to entry. And understanding how to navigate that process can be a bit difficult and time consuming. The other con I would say here is you're almost fixing your capital to an interest rate and a payment stream in a high inflation environment. Usually you don't want to do that. If I, for instance, invest in a bond at 4% and inflation is 5%, I'm losing money every year, sort of thing. And that's what this is. You're basically buying debt. And when you buy debt, it usually has a fixed payment to it. And if it has a fixed payment in a high inflation environment, you're not participating in the inflation tailwind. So it can be a bit of a headwind.
Yeah, I would say that would be probably the number one downfall thing. Is it an asset class that you would like? I do like the idea that being the bank, you have the ability to restructure certain things. But if you were to come to me and say, hey, I can give you 5% or 6%, but it's going to be for the next 30 years, I personally would be like, I think I'll pass. And with that said, where else out there can you get something pretty solid and pretty safe for 5-6%? Take one of your cons and make it a pro. I love when things are a little bit harder to enter because just like I'm a little bit hesitant to compete with the single family game because it seems like everybody's a single family expert. I feel like in this game, if you do want to take this seriously, it might take some time to get up and learn, but then the competition is really low. And so it's one of those cons that is an initial con, but could be a pro if you lean into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I own a couple real estate notes. It's basically an income stream tied to a piece of property. And if that person stops paying the income stream, then all of a sudden I get access to a property for pennies on the dollar. So it's a great asset class. But to your point, I mean, I think
how many years is it a 30-year note?
So no, it was originally a 30-year note, but I think they're like 12 to 14 years now. I mean, it was in its maturation process, or it was maturing. Where I would love to get into with this space is finding seller finance notes where the person that owns the paper, because usually seller finance notes are only like 2, 3, 5, 10 years. I mean, they're smaller terms and higher interest rates because they're outside of the banking system. So since I'm the lender and I'm taking a chance on you outside of the system, I can charge a higher rate. I would love to go find those seller finance notes that have 5 years left on them at a 9% interest rate kind of thing, and just know that my capital is working at 9% with a consistent income stream.
I love it, man. Anything that you want to summarize in bundling this all together?
No, Invest in Debt is probably one of my favorite real estate books because I am a math nerd and because I love numbers. So if you love numbers and figuring out formulas and how do you tweak this to get a better return and things like that, it's going to be a great book for you. If you don't like numbers, don't even bother reading it because it'll make your head spin. But I would also go check out the Good Deeds podcast with Jamie. I think he and Chris do a really good job over there kind of going through some of the issues here. But to your point, where there's issues, there's usually good upside too.
And if you're enjoying the series that we're in on the BetterWealth show about real estate, you'll love the podcast that you host, Matt, Ice Cream with Investors. And I would highly recommend you go check him out, subscribe, and make sure to leave a review. And we're learning a ton about real estate, but ultimately what it's going to blow up into is everything investing. And I love the idea of starting with real estate. And so thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening to the BetterWealth podcast. It would mean the world to me if you could hit subscribe, leave a review, and share this with the people that you know and love.